Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I've been trying to figure out how to start this for 2 months, which is longer than I usually spend figuring out how to do anything. I'm not a complicated man. I work with my hands. I think in straight lines. I trust what I can see and measure and hold. The things I can't see or measure or hold, I've generally had the good sense to leave alone. This one, I can't leave alone anymore. Not since I drove past that corner 2 months ago and saw what was there, which was exactly what should have been there if an 11-year-old piece of paper from a metal canister in my garage is to be believed. It's to be believed. I know that now, completely and without reservation, and I've known it since a waiting room in Toledo in 2019. But the bakery was the thing that finally made me need to say it out loud. My name is Wes Kimball. I'm 58 years old. I spent 27 years as a crew chief for a municipal excavation contractor in Defiance, Ohio, before my knees gave me the kind of advice that's hard to argue with. I retired 3 years ago. I live in the same house I've lived in for 20 years, 2 blocks from where I grew up, in a city that I know, the way you know a place when you never had any particular reason to leave it. Defiance is not a remarkable place by any standard you'd apply from the outside, which is fine with me. I have always thought the unremarkable places were the honest ones. What happened here in the summer of 2014 wasn't unremarkable. I've spent 11 years sorting out how to hold it, and the honest answer is that I haven't fully managed it, and I'm not sure I'm supposed to. The job was a waterline replacement project on Elm Grove, a residential block about 10 minutes from downtown. Routine work, the kind my crew could do in our sleep by that point in our careers. Dig to the specified depth, expose the existing line, assess, replace, backfill, move to the next address. We'd done versions of this job on every street in the city over the years. It was reliable work in the way that aging infrastructure is reliable. There was always more of it. I had 4 guys on that crew. The one you need to know about is Tad Murch, who was 23 at the time and in his 2nd year working for us, and enthusiastic about the job in the way young guys are enthusiastic before the work teaches them that enthusiasm is best deployed selectively. Good worker though, paid attention. We were about 4 hours into the dig, somewhere around 4 feet down on the 3rd address of the day, when Tad's shovel hit something that made a sound it shouldn't have made. Metal on metal, clean and solid. Not the dull contact of a shovel finding a rock or the different sound of hitting an existing pipe. He called out. We stopped the machine and we went manual to clear around it. It came out of the ground looking like a large thermos, cylindrical, roughly 14 inches long, maybe 4 in diameter. The metal was dark, not painted, just the color of whatever alloy it was made from. And the cap was threaded and welded, a clean bead all around the joint. No corrosion that I could see at first look, which I registered and set aside to think about. Stamped into the side in clean capital letters, the kind made with a punch set rather than engraved. Time capsule. And below that, do not open before 2040. Tad held it up like he'd found treasure, which, in the spirit of a dull Tuesday, he had. The guys were pleased. Finding a time capsule on a dig is the kind of thing that gets talked about at the end of the day over a beer, and I understood their enthusiasm. I photographed it, logged it in the project documentation as recovered material, and thought about what the right move was. The right move was to turn it over to the city, which would route it to the County Historical Society or some similar body, where it would sit in a storage room for a while and eventually be opened in 2040 if anybody remembered it. That was the correct professional and civic procedure, and I knew it. I put it in my truck. I want to own that. I made a deliberate choice that I can justify but not fully excuse, which is a category of decision I've made a handful of times in my life and which I'm at peace with. I took it home because something about it was bothering me, and I needed to sit with it somewhere private rather than somewhere official. Here's what was bothering me: the depth. 4 feet is not deep for something intended to be buried for 16 years, which is the span between 2024 and 2040. Standard time capsule burial runs shallower than that for projects expecting to be recovered within a generation. 4 feet is a depth that suggests the burial was intentional about not being easily found, which is a different purpose than the standard time capsule purpose of being found on a schedule. It's also a depth consistent with something buried in the last few years, rather than something placed there in anticipation of a 2040 opening. Because 4 feet is how deep you bury something you want to stay buried for a while, not how deep you bury something you want a future community group to dig up on a ceremony date. And the metal: no oxidation pattern at the weld, no soil staining in the joint where the cap met the cylinder, which on any buried metal object takes on the color and chemistry of the surrounding soil over time in a way that's consistent and readable if you know what to look for. This canister had been in the ground for months at the outside, possibly less. Something that wanted to be opened in 2040 had no business looking like it went in the ground last Tuesday. I drove home with it on the seat beside me, and I didn't talk myself out of what I was thinking, which was that this object had been put there recently and deliberately in the path of a dig it could not have predicted unless the person putting it there already knew the dig was coming. I have a grinder in my garage because I have most things in my garage that a man in my line of work accumulates over a career. I cut the weld on the cap in about 4 minutes. The cap came off cleanly. Inside the canister, the contents were sealed in clear plastic bags, the heavy gauge kind. Heat sealed at the top rather than zipped. Whoever had packed this had thought about moisture and had thought about it carefully. I don't know exactly what I expected. The time capsule conceit had primed me for sentiment. Letters from children, a Polaroid, maybe a sports section from whatever year it was buried, the kind of thing community groups put together when they want to feel connected to the future. What I took out of the first bag was a folded newspaper. I recognized it before I unfolded it. The paper stock, the column width visible at the fold, the specific masthead font of the regional paper I'd been reading my whole adult life. Same paper, same name, same layout. I unfolded it on my kitchen table. The date at the top of the front page was June 14th, 2031. I put it down. I looked at my kitchen. The familiar things, the coffee maker, the calendar on the wall with a dentist appointment circled, the dish rack, the view of the backyard through the window over the sink, the particular quality of a summer evening in Ohio when the light is going flat and the yard is thinking about becoming dark. I picked the newspaper back up. It was completely ordinary. That's what I keep coming back to when I try to describe it, because I think people expect something from a newspaper dated 17 years in the future that isn't what this delivered. They expect revelation. They expect the headlines of a changed world. What I had was page 3 of the local section, with a piece about the County Road Commission reconsidering a resurfacing schedule, and a letter to the editor about a zoning dispute, and a box score from a regional high school baseball tournament. I had an advertisement for a car dealership I'd bought 2 trucks from over the years, running the same format of ad I'd seen from them for a decade, just with different models. I had a crossword that I found myself looking at for a moment before I remembered what I was holding. I read every page. I sat at my kitchen table on a summer evening in 2014 and read a newspaper from 2031, the way I read the paper most mornings. Slowly, with coffee, in no particular hurry. The second bag held a photograph. A street downtown, a block I drove through probably 4 times a week. I knew the angle. It was taken from the sidewalk on the east side, facing the corner where a vacant lot had been sitting for as long as I could remember clearly. My whole life, the lot had been gravel and scrub grass and a chain-link fence with a faded sign on it about a development project that had never materialized. In the photograph, there was a building on that lot. 2 stories, brick, well-proportioned, the kind of construction that fits a downtown block without trying to dominate it. A bakery from the signage above the door. The name in clean lettering I didn't recognize. 2 or 3 people visible through the front window. A normal afternoon on a normal block, except the lot wasn't empty anymore. Written on the back in ballpoint pen, in the same careful handwriting I would encounter in the third item, March 2029. The third bag held a letter, 3 pages, front and back on the first 2. The third page used only on one side. I'm going to try to give you the shape of it without giving you every word, because some of it feels like it was written for me specifically, and I'm not sure all of it belongs in the open. She didn't give her name, not anywhere in 3 pages. I've thought about that choice for 11 years, and I understand it now in a way I didn't at first. There was no name she could give me that would mean anything, and the absence of a name was itself a kind of information. It said, "What matters here isn't who I am." It said, "I am not the point of this." She wrote that she grew up in Defiance. She wrote that she had spent years working on the mechanism of what she was doing, and that placing the object required putting it in the path of a known future disturbance. A specific excavation project on a specific street on a specific date, the records of which she'd found in archived municipal files. She wrote that she'd placed the canister knowing when it would be found and by whom, because the crew roster was in the same archive as the project records. She listed things, quietly, matter-of-factly, the way you'd describe a town to someone who was going to be living in it for a while. What businesses would close and roughly when. What would be built and where. A stretch of road on the south edge of the county that would flood badly after a rain event in the spring of 2022. Things that would change and things that wouldn't. The ordinary evolution of a place across 17 years. It wasn't alarming. It wasn't intended to be alarming. It read exactly the way she described it, like a letter from someone describing home. Then the handwriting changed on the third page. Same pen, same hand, but smaller and more careful. The way writing gets when someone slows down, because they're saying something they want to get exactly right. She wrote that she wanted to make sure that Cora Kimball's father knew, before it happened, that the accident in the fall of 2019 would not be permanent, that Cora would recover fully, that this was the one thing she had wanted to make certain reached someone who would be there when it mattered, and she had chosen this Capsule and this crew because his name was on the roster and she wanted it to reach him directly. I read that section 4 times. I don't have a daughter. I have 2 sons, both grown, neither named Cora. I don't know anyone named Cora. In the summer of 2014, the name Cora Kimball referred to a person who did not exist. I put everything back in the bags back in the canister, and I carried it out to the garage and put it on a shelf between a box of drill bits and an old level I keep meaning to recalibrate. Then I went back inside and ate dinner and watched television and went to bed and lay there for a long time with my eyes open in the dark. October of 2014. My younger brother Del and his wife Patrice had their first child, a daughter. They named her Cora. I drove to the hospital the evening she was born, and I held her in the maternity ward while Del filled out paperwork and Patrice slept, and I stood there in the specific fluorescent quiet of a hospital at that hour with a 7-pound baby in my arms and the name on the canister in my garage running through my head on a loop that I couldn't slow down. Cora Kimball. She existed now. She was in my arms, which is a strange place to be when you're the subject of a letter that arrived 11 years early. I drove home and read the letter again that night. I stood in my garage in my coat and read the third page under the work light until I had it as close to memorized as I needed it to be. She'd found my name on a crew roster. From where she was, 2031 or beyond, working from archived municipal records, there was no way to know that Cora was my niece rather than my daughter. There was only a name on a document and a name on a birth record, and the connection between them, which from the distance she was working across must have looked like a straight line. It was a straight line. Del and I grew up in the same house and have lived 2 miles apart our entire adult lives, and I have been as present in Cora's life as any father could claim to be, and more present than some. The woman who wrote that letter was not wrong about where to aim it. She was just working with incomplete information, which is what everyone who sends anything anywhere is always working with. She wanted it to reach the right person. It reached the right person. I thought about the fall of 2019. I had 5 years, roughly, before whatever was coming for Cora arrived. I didn't know what form it would take. The letter said accident, and it said fall, and it said she would recover fully, and those were the only coordinates I had. I couldn't tell Del. I went through versions of how that conversation would go, and none of them ended anywhere useful, and more importantly, none of them ended with Del being helped rather than burdened by information he couldn't do anything with. You don't tell a man that his daughter is going to be in an accident. You just make sure you're there. I closed the canister and put it back on the shelf. I went on with my life. The first business the letter described closing was a hardware supply store on the east side of town. It closed in the fall of 2016. I'd bought materials there for 20 years, and I was sorry to see it go. And I stood in the parking lot of the going out of business sale and thought about a piece of handwriting in my garage, a restaurant the letter mentioned went dark in 2017. I'd eaten there maybe twice a year since my 30s. Unremarkable food in the comfortable way of places you go out of habit, and its absence left a gap in the commercial block that felt larger than the restaurant's actual footprint. In 2018, a building went up near the edge of the commercial district on a lot the letter had specified. I drove past the construction for 3 months while it went up and stood in the form it had been described as standing in, and when it opened I went inside and looked at the interior and thought about what it meant that I already knew this room existed before the foundation was poured. I drove past each of these things with the feeling of a man watching a calendar turn. Not dread exactly, something more neutral than dread and more uncomfortable than comfort. The specific feeling of knowing what's coming without being able to do much about it except watch it arrive. The spring of 2022 was wet, and the stretch of road on the south end of the county flooded in April in the way that stretch of road had apparently always been going to flood, and the county spent the summer addressing the drainage issue that had apparently always been going to need addressing. I drove past the repair work on my way to a job site and noted it the way I'd been noting things for 8 years, which was quietly and without showing it on my face. Then it was September of 2019. I don't want to spend too long on this part because it belongs more to Del and Patrice than it does to me, and I'm aware of that. It's their story and Cora's story, and I'm in the edge of it, the way I've been in the edge of most things in my life, which is where I'm most comfortable and where I'm most useful. What I'll say is this: Cora was 5 years old on a regular afternoon at the house in the backyard. Play structure, a fall from the top platform, a bad landing, a head injury that was serious enough that the responding paramedics made the call quickly and clearly. Del called me from the ambulance. I was in my truck before he finished the sentence. I drove to Toledo the way you drive when someone you love needs you on the other side of a distance, and the distance is the only obstacle. I sat in the waiting room of a children's hospital for most of a night. I drank coffee from a machine that charged $1 for something that tasted like it cost a dime. I watched the door that the doctors came through, and I thought about 3 pages of careful handwriting, and I thought about a woman I would never meet who grew up in this part of Ohio and spent years figuring out how to reach backward across a distance that shouldn't be reachable. And when she got there, she brought a newspaper and a photograph of a bakery and a quiet list of things that were going to happen. And then, at the bottom of the last page, she wrote down the one personal thing. Not because she had to, because she was the kind of person who looked at an extraordinary capability and asked what it could do for someone who needed it. Cora was in surgery for several hours. The surgical team was good. The outcome was good. It took 4 months of recovery, and there were hard stretches in those 4 months. But in January of 2020, she came home, and she was fine, and she was 5 years old, and she handled the whole thing with the specific resilience of a 5-year-old's, which is the most complete and unconditional resilience available anywhere in the human experience. I pulled over twice on the highway on the drive back from Toledo, not to check my phone or deal with something practical. I just couldn't see well enough to drive, and I needed a few minutes with the windows down and the dark outside and the weight of what had just happened moving through me in whatever way it needed to move. The letter said she would recover fully. The letter was right. 2 months ago, I drove through the block downtown where the vacant corner lot had been since before I could remember it being anything else. The lot wasn't vacant. A 2-story brick building, the exterior still carrying the particular cleanness of new construction. The sign above the door had the name I'd been holding in my head since 2014, in the lettering style I knew from the photograph on my garage shelf. A bakery, like the signage said. I could see the interior through the front window, the counter, the cases, a few tables, a person behind the register. I parked on the side street and sat for a minute. The photograph on the back said, March 2029. It was not March 2029, but buildings take time to open after construction finishes, and permits take time, and some things arrive a little early. And I decided that close enough was close enough. What mattered was that the building was there. What mattered was that the lot was no longer a gravel patch with a chain link fence and a sign about a development project that everyone had assumed was never going to happen. It had happened. Everything in that canister had happened, or was happening, or was going to happen in a year I could count toward on one hand. I went inside. I ordered a coffee at the counter because the ordering a coffee felt like the appropriate way to be in a place I'd been carrying around in my head for 11 years. I sat at a table by the window and drank it slowly and watched the street outside, the ordinary mid-morning traffic of a small Ohio city going about its Wednesday. The same street I've driven down my whole life, wearing a building that didn't used to be there. The coffee was good. Better than you'd expect from a place that size, the way some places just get coffee right without making a project of it. The pastry case looked serious. I bought a thing with almonds on my way out that turned out to be worth driving across town for, which I have now done twice. The canister is still on the shelf in my garage. The newspaper is still inside it, still dated June 14th, 2031, which is 5 years from where I'm standing now. I know the contents well enough that I don't need to read it again. The sports, the weather, the county road commission, the crossword I never finished. I know the obituary for the man whose name I didn't recognize in 2014 and still don't recognize now, which is its own kind of thing to sit with. I know things I have no business knowing about a year that hasn't arrived yet. Some days that feels like a gift. I won't pretend otherwise. There's something about knowing the shape of what's coming that makes it possible to be present in what's here in a way I don't think I'd manage otherwise. To drive past the bakery and appreciate the coffee and the almond thing and the fact of a vacant lot becoming something worth stopping for without grieving the vacancy. Some days it feels like warmth from a source I can't see clearly. Other days it feels like standing in a room that's the right temperature but slightly pressurized, comfortable enough to stay in but off in a way your body registers before your mind does. The specific discomfort of knowing without being supposed to know. I've made peace with both of those. They coexist, and coexistence is what I've got. What I keep coming back to, the thing that sits at the center of all of it, is not the newspaper or the photograph or the inventory of things that came true. It's the bottom of the third page, the handwriting that went smaller and more careful because she was saying the one thing she'd built all of this to say. She didn't need to include it. The capsule was extraordinary without it. A newspaper from 2031 and a photograph of a building that doesn't exist yet are already more than enough to constitute something remarkable. She had 3 pages to work with, and she used 2.5 of them on a quiet description of a town across 17 years. And then she used the last half page on a child she knew only from a name in a record. I think about what kind of person does that. I've thought about it for 11 years, and I keep arriving at the same picture. Not her face, which I'll never have, but a quality. The quality of someone who looks at an extraordinary capability and asks, first and longest and most seriously, what it can do for someone else, who packs a capsule for a future that won't remember her name and includes, at the end of it, the one piece of information that would matter most to a specific man on a specific night in a waiting room in Toledo. She didn't know me. She knew my name from a crew roster in an archived municipal file, and she knew that a girl named Cora would be connected to that name, and she knew what was coming for Cora in 2019, and she decided that the man on the crew roster should know that Cora was going to be okay. That's it. That's the whole of what she did for me. And it is, without question, the most valuable thing anyone has ever done for me, and I have no way to tell her that. The distance only ran one way, and she sent everything she had across it, and on this side, there's no channel back. But I think about her when I drive past the bakery, which is often because it's on a block I was already driving past regularly, and also because the almond thing has become a habit I'm not trying to break. I think about a woman who grew up in Defiance, Ohio, and found her way to a capability that shouldn't exist, and used it to send a newspaper and a photograph and 3 pages of quiet description and 14 careful words at the bottom of the last page. I hope 2031 was good to her. I hope the years between now and then were good to her. I hope she found out it worked, that the capsule landed where she aimed it and was found on the right day by the right person, and that the letter reached him in time to matter when it needed to matter. I don't know how she'd find that out. I don't know if the distance she crossed runs information in the other direction or only the one. I don't know the mechanics of any of it, and I have stopped needing to. What I know is that on a night in September 2019, I sat in a waiting room in Toledo carrying something a stranger gave me, and the thing she gave me was the one thing that made it possible to sit there without coming apart. She gave me the knowledge that Cora was going to be okay before she knew Cora was going to be okay, which meant that I knew it when Dell didn't, when Patrice didn't, when the doctors walking through that door were still working toward the outcome rather than reporting it. That's not nothing. That's not close to nothing. I drive past the bakery and I drink the coffee and I think about her, and I think that somewhere between the extraordinary thing she did and the ordinary Wednesday morning it landed in, there's the whole shape of what people are capable of when they're at their best, which is to take what they have and spend it on someone who needs it without asking for anything back, without even leaving a name. Cora is 10 years old. She is stubborn and loud and currently drawing horses on every surface she can find, including 2 that I am going to have to repaint in my garage. She calls me Uncle Wes, and she asks me questions I can't answer, and she is, by every measure I know how to apply, completely and entirely fine. I hope she knows. I hope somehow, across whatever distance separates a man in Ohio from the woman who sent that capsule, she knows. Wes Kimball, Defiance, Ohio. That's all of it. I hope it gets where it needs to go.